What's up everyone, welcome back to another video on this channel. Today I want to share with you a few things that I have been enjoying over the past few weeks that we've been stuck indoors. When this all started, I really had the urge to watch things mindlessly, like bad comedies and Netflix shows like Tiger King. So if that is more your piece of cake, watching things getting your mind off of the current crisis, then this video is probably not for you. I want to share with you a few things that I have been enjoying that actually kind of taught me things about the current situation. So it's a bit more on the intellectual side. And yeah, these are things that I have been reading, listening to, or watching. So let's get right into it. The first thing that I want to recommend to you is this book by Susie Orbach. It's called In Therapy, and it's kind of a look into her world. She's a psychotherapist in England, I believe, and she goes through a few sessions that she's had with clients, and you get to read the dialogue between them, their issues, what they are seeing her for, but you can also kind of look into her head, the head of the psychotherapist, to learn more about what happens behind the scenes in therapy. Because obviously psychotherapists ask you certain questions, and they ask you these questions to kind of get to know more about your situation or get you to think in a different way about your emotions and about people's motives. So of course, as a medical student, this is really interesting and I highly recommend it. But also if you don't study medicine, it's a really good overview of the emotions and the things that we all go through from time to time, and the things that may lie behind those emotions and situations. So I haven't actually finished the book, but so far I'm giving it a 4 out of 5 stars because it's a really great book. So the second thing I would like to recommend is the documentary, The Four Horsemen. Now this documentary is quite old, I believe it's from 2012, but it is a documentary that looks at the current economic system that we have in the West. So modern economics is a topic versus classical economics. And because I've never studied economy or never really took the time to read about economy, I never really paid much attention when I hear certain things in the news, like fractional reserve banking or a debt-driven economy or political lobbying from banks. I never really took the time to read what's behind all of these terms that we hear a lot in the news, we hear a lot in sound bites. And I think this documentary does a great job to kind of teach you through animation and through talking with specialists about this subject of economy. And it's actually very relevant to the things that are happening today, because most governments are giving a huge money injection into their own economies and are paying people money to kind of keep paying their monthly things like rent. And I think many things in the economy will be changing after this, and this was just a great way to kind of get more familiar with certain terms that are being flown around and also the shortcomings of the economy. So this documentary actually features people who used to work at the World Bank. The chief economy officer is one of the talking heads. Former Wall Street traders are a few of the talking heads. And then lastly, economic hitmen. And I never heard of that term before, economic hitman. But I'm gonna leave you with a little bit of a cliffhanger there, because I never thought there would be something like that or some job like that, and it really changed my worldview. So I really recommend it. One drawback, however, of this documentary is that it kind of poses a solution to the current economy that they have, and they're not really very specific with that. So if you're looking for specific solutions or specific options on how to change things, that is not really what happens in this documentary. It's more so about learning more about the whole thing in general. And a few things from this documentary that I found interesting. I'm just going to read that from my iPad here. For every dollar in the US GDP, so the gross domestic product, $1 is actually equal to $5.50 in debt. So that is a number that kind of blew my mind and probably has huge implications for the years to come. Another point is when talking about income levels for bosses versus the lowest paid employee of a company, historically, great thinkers have shed their thoughts on how that ratio should be. So the highest earning employee in a business, usually the CEO and the CFOs and the shareholders, there is a ratio between them and the lowest paying employee in that business. Plato already had his thoughts on that. Granted, we didn't have a world economy back then, and most of the economy was based on slavery, but he said that a 6-to-1 ratio was kind of like the golden balance, where the wealthiest wouldn't get too wealthy and the poorest wouldn't get too poor. Peter Drucker, who is seen as the father of management thinking, already put that ratio at 20-to-1. However, today we have ratios of 500-to-1. An example is Walt Disney or Coca-Cola. Now again, these companies have huge variations in employees, so it might not be too fair to compare absolute income of the lowest paid employee to the highest paid one, but still it is something that really painted a picture about how we have progressed. And when we are talking about certain trends in the economy, that brings me to my third recommendation, which is again a book that I'm still reading as well. I almost have finished it, and it's this book, The Next 100 Years by George Friedman. So George Friedman has a company in which he thinks and speculates about geopolitics. So he doesn't look at the small individual things that are happening on a political and on a world scale. He looks at the macro trends. So over hundreds of years, he and his company analyze things that happen, from wars to political changes in countries, to economic changes, to how a country develops after a disaster, after a war. And it's a really interesting book to kind of start thinking about world politics and geopolitics, it's in the name, and think about these things on a bigger scale. The other day I saw a comment on some video that I was watching in which someone suggested that now that we have this corona crisis, China is going to take over the world. And sometimes in the news and from various political leaders, we get these sound bites about things that people are scared of, or people predict political things that will happen, and it's easy to get caught up in those things because they are based on like the last 5 to 10 years. But when you read this book, you really start to think about the things that happen in the world on a bigger scale. So the fact that some revolution, like the French Revolution, still has influence on things that are happening on a world scale today, or the way that the US spends their military budget and on their maritime fleet has huge implications for the rest of the world. And something else that I find really interesting is the locations of certain countries and how they will influence future geopolitical bonds between countries. For example, Turkey is kind of like the port between the West and the Middle Eastern countries, and how Turkey in the future will develop. There are some really interesting predictions in this book that really make me rethink my worldview. So again, I'm giving this a 5 out of 5 stars. Let's go ahead with 5 out of 5. The documentary, by the way, I think is a 3.5 out of 5. Let's say that. So then another thing that I found really interesting is the podcast Tim Ferriss Show. Probably you're familiar with it if you're into podcasts. Tim Ferriss interviewed Alain de Botton, who is the founder of the School of Life. And I think he's also a writer, a philosopher, and an all-round epic human being. You'll probably be able to find some videos of him on YouTube where he talks about various topics of life. I highly recommend that you look at those as well. But this podcast was really nice because they talked about everything from how he became the person that he is today and how he learned about philosophy, and a book he has written that's heavily focused on Albert Camus, his philosophy, and how people who are interested in philosophy can get into philosophy. But one of the most interesting things I think that they talked about was something that Alain calls the great challenge of our age. And what he said is that the great challenge of our age is to take good ideas and make them available to a wide public. Often on this platform and in different conversations that people are having, we try to look at original ideas and we try to think of something completely new that no one else has ever done. And if we find that someone else has already done it, we usually give up and don't assess the viability of that idea anymore. And what I find interesting from Alain de Botton is that he says that there's great value in trying to combine different ideas or making an existing idea available to a wider public. He says that nowadays, if you want something, a way of thinking or another idea to become widely known, you need millions of followers for that. A good example is TED Talks. If we look at Simon Sinek's TED Talk, Start With Why, which he also read a book on and multiple books now, he's someone that his idea went viral because he made his idea available to the masses. And then Alain goes on to say the reason that people are wringing their hands and saying things like, why don't we all just do this or why don't we all do that, is because the things that are communicated to the masses through primetime TV or through other very popular channels aren't being used by people who want to bring forth very great existing ideas. So one main thing that I'm taking away from that is that there's so much more value in existing ideas and repackaging them and then bringing them to the masses. So that's something I'll be keeping in the back of my head. And the rest of the podcast is amazing as well. So I highly recommend that. And that brings us to the last thing that I consumed in the last 3 weeks, which is the movie The Favorite. Since it came out, it already won an Oscar. Olivia Colman plays Queen Anne, and she's won an Oscar for Best Actress, which is very, very well deserved. She's one of my favorite actresses at this moment. And this movie features Rachel Weisz as well and Emma Stone. So all of them are Oscar winners, all of them are amazing. And this movie is kind of like a black comedy. It's very odd. The dialogue is very witty. It's shot beautifully. It's a costume drama, but actually it really isn't. It really feels like a more modern film. And I think I'll be rewatching this movie many, many times. If you are into the technicalities kind of behind feature films, such as the way a movie is colored, the costumes, the way it's shot, and great original dialogue, then you will probably love this movie. So the movie is set in England in the early 1700s, and Rachel Weisz and Emma Stone play characters that are in a power struggle to vie for the Queen's attention. So Rachel Weisz's character, Sarah Churchill, she is a dear friend and also lover of Queen Anne. And Emma Stone is kind of the poor niece of Sarah Churchill, who comes in, then makes it to her chamber lady and also starts battling for her attention. And they all have their own reasons to do so, but the movie is very beautifully shot. It's shot with a 6mm wide lens at times, which kind of gives it this fisheye effect. And the director, Yorgos Lanthimos, makes use of very original stylistic ideas that I think make this movie beautiful to watch. The costumes are great. It's very black and white, so that makes it kind of a bit more modern than it probably used to be in the 1700s. And also the location is beautiful. I think everything about this movie, the actors, I just can't find anything that I didn't like about this movie. So if you are into those kinds of things, definitely give that a watch. And that's it for the things that I enjoyed in the past few weeks. Hopefully I'll do it again in a month or so, because I think most of the things that I consume and I enjoy, I also take from these videos of other people who make favorites videos. So I hope that I gave you some good suggestions. And if you have any suggestions, or you have read, seen, or listened to the things that I have recommended to you, let me know in the comments below what you thought of them. Especially The Favorite if I can find some people who are really into those kinds of things, I'd love to talk more about that. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.